The air felt sharp, biting through Clarissa's worn jacket as she strolled down the deserted downtown street. The usual city clamor had faded, leaving behind the occasional hum of passing cars and the quiet shuffle of her footsteps. Clarissa kept her head down, familiar with the path to the park, where she would often rest for the night. The city had long lost its warmth for her, no longer full of promise, just survival. Her makeshift shelters and overcrowded refuges had become her life, but she still walked with a quiet dignity. Life might have beaten her down, but it hadn't broken her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden roar of a car engine, much louder than the usual traffic sounds. Clarissa's gaze snapped up. A sleek, luxury car sped recklessly down the narrow street, its tires screeching as the driver struggled to control it. Time seemed to slow as the car skidded, spiraling out of control until it slammed into a lamppost with a sickening crunch of metal. Clarissa's feet moved before her mind could catch up. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from urgency. The car, now crumpled around the post, looked like a crushed soda can. As she reached it, she saw the driver slumped over the steering wheel, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. The door wouldn't budge. Clarissa wedged her fingers into the gap and pulled with all her might. The door finally gave way with a groan of metal, and she gently pulled the man out, his breaths shallow and uneven. She shouted for help, her voice shaky but carrying into the still night. Sirens pierced the silence moments later, and an ambulance arrived, medics swarming the scene. Clarissa stepped back, watching as they whisked the injured man away. She stood there for a moment, hands trembling, before turning to leave. No one asked her name. She didn't expect them to. Helping wasn't about being thanked. Days later, Christopher lay in a hospital bed, flashes of the accident darting through his mind like scattered puzzle pieces. But one piece stayed with him, the face of the woman who had saved him. He couldn't remember much else, but he knew he owed that stranger his life. Once he was on his feet again, he made it his mission to find her. It wasn't easy. Clarissa left no digital breadcrumbs, no address to trace. Weeks of searching finally led Christopher's team to the park where Clarissa stayed. When Christopher saw her, his heart swelled with gratitude. The woman standing before him, wearing a threadbare jacket and worn shoes, was the one who had pulled him from the wreckage. It was hard to reconcile the image. This humble woman had saved his life. Christopher's words fumbled out. You saved me. I've been looking for you to thank you." Clarissa's tired eyes met his. "I didn't do it for thanks. You needed help. I was there." But Christopher couldn't leave it at that. The woman before him had risked everything for a stranger. "You deserve better than this," Christopher said, his eyes scanning the park bench and the sparse belongings Clarissa called her own. "Let me help. A job, a place to stay. You shouldn't be here." Clarissa hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her face. People didn't just offer help like that. But something in Christopher's voice, the sincerity, made her pause. Maybe this was her chance. Slowly, she nodded, accepting the offer. It wasn't long before Clarissa's life began to change. The apartment Christopher provided was small but warm, a far cry from the cold nights in the park. The job at the company challenged Clarissa, but her sharp mind and relentless work ethic earned her respect. As the months passed, Clarissa climbed the ranks, gaining more than just a paycheck. She found purpose again. Christopher and Clarissa grew close, an unexpected bond forming between them. One afternoon, over lunch, Clarissa shared pieces of her past. She spoke of the parents she had lost in a car accident when she was just a girl, and how the foster system had been her only home after that. Christopher's fork froze in mid-air. Something in Clarissa's story sounded eerily familiar. His thoughts raced back to his old business partner, a man named Thompson, who had died in a car accident years ago, leaving behind a young daughter. Could it be? His voice shook as he asked, "What were your parents' names?" When Clarissa told him, the realization hit Christopher like a punch to the gut. Thompson, his mentor, his friend, had been Clarissa's father. Christopher had promised to look after the girl, but in the whirlwind of expanding his empire, he had lost track of her. And now, here they were. Fate had brought them back together. Christopher's eyes brimmed with emotion. "Clarissa, your father was my business partner. I promised to take care of you, but I failed. I didn't know." Clarissa sat, her mind reeling. The man who had given her a second chance, the man whose life she had saved, had been tied to her father all along. The weight of the revelation settled between them like a quiet storm, heavy but undeniable. Christopher wasn't just offering Clarissa a job or a place to stay anymore. He owed her much more than that. Clarissa was the rightful heir to her father's wealth and legacy, an empire built by both Thompson and Christopher. Overnight, Clarissa went from living on the streets to inheriting a fortune. But the money didn't change Clarissa. She remained the woman who had walked through life with resilience and quiet strength. Wealth to her wasn't about the material things. It was about the relationship she built, the compassion she showed, and the strength she found within herself. Christopher, too, was changed. Clarissa had saved his life in more ways than one, by pulling him from the wreck and by reminding him of what truly mattered. Together, they navigated the business world as partners, but more importantly, as family. Bound not by blood, but by trust, shared experiences, and a deep understanding of what it means to live a life of purpose. Clarissa stood in the sleek, glass-walled office, the city sprawling beneath her. Her fingers gently traced the edge of her father's old desk, a relic that had seen more deals than she could count. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his legacy settle on her shoulders. The empire he built was now hers, but it wasn't the power or the wealth that held her gaze. It was the memories of the streets, the times when food was scarce, and survival was a daily battle. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. Christopher entered quietly, his steps careful, as if he didn't want to disturb her. He had always been like that with her, gentle, though his reputation in business had been anything but. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, looking out at the horizon. Clarissa could feel the warmth of his presence, and it reminded her of how much their relationship had changed. There had been a time when Christopher was just her father's business partner, a man obsessed with numbers and profit margins. But now he was more than that. He was the father figure she never knew she needed. Christopher's voice finally broke the silence. "You've done well, Clarissa," he said, his tone soft, yet filled with pride. She glanced at him, catching the subtle smile that played on his lips. It wasn't the business he was proud of. Not really. It was her. Her resilience, her kindness. The way she treated people, both in and out of the boardroom, was what set her apart. She had a way of making everyone feel like they mattered, from the janitor who cleaned the hallways to the executives who sat in on meetings. Clarissa smiled back, her eyes softening. "I've had a good teacher," she replied, though she knew it wasn't just Christopher's guidance that had shaped her. It was the struggles, the hardships, and the people she had met along the way. As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. Christopher, the once tough, unyielding businessman, softened in her presence. He found himself caring for her in ways he hadn't expected, like a father doting on his daughter. He watched her make decisions that weren't just smart, but compassionate, and it stirred something deep inside him, a pride he hadn't felt in years. Clarissa, in turn, thrived under his mentorship. She didn't just rise through the company, she changed it. Employees looked up to her, not because of her last name, but because of her heart. She didn't lead with authority, but with empathy, and it showed in the way the company flourished under her care. Christopher, often watching from the sidelines, marveled at the woman she had become. He had thought his life was complete with his fortune, his success, but Clarissa had shown him that fulfillment came from something deeper: love, connection, and caring for someone beyond himself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Christopher sat in his study, contemplating the future. Clarissa deserved everything. Success, yes, but also love. The kind that came from a partner who would stand by her side, through thick and thin. He knew she was strong enough to find her own path, but still, he couldn't help but hope that she would find someone who saw her the way he did. He smiled to himself, knowing that whatever came next, Clarissa would handle it with the same grace and strength that had carried her through everything else. And he would be there, watching with pride, as she continued to build a life filled not just with success, but with the love and connection that made it all worthwhile. Clarissa stood in the soft glow of the morning sun, her hands smoothing the folds of her dress. She caught her reflection in the mirror. A mixture of excitement and nervousness played on her face. Today was her wedding day, and it wasn't the lavishness that filled her thoughts. It was the people, the moments, the journey that had led her here. There was a knock at the door. Christopher stepped in, his usual calm demeanor softened by the occasion. His eyes fell on her, taking in the sight of the woman he had watched grow, from a determined young lady fighting her way through life to this, a bride, ready to start a new chapter. He smiled, pride in every line of his face. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Clarissa smiled back, her heart swelling. This man, who had once been her father's business partner, had become more than that. He had become her father in every way that mattered. A few months earlier, she had introduced Christopher to Matthew. She remembered that day clearly. The way Christopher's brows furrowed at first, studying Matthew with the sharp eye of a man who had seen much of the world. But Matthew wasn't fazed. He stood tall, calm, his love for Clarissa shining through in every word he spoke, every look he gave her. He wasn't intimidated by her success or the vast fortune she was set to inherit. No, what Matthew admired most was her strength, her kindness, the woman she had become. Christopher had felt something shift that day. He and Matthew had quickly found common ground, talking about business, yes, but also about life, about giving back, about what really mattered. And then, Christopher had seen it. The way Matthew looked at Clarissa, the way he cherished her. It wasn't long before Christopher realized that this was the man who would stand by Clarissa's side, not as a shadow, but as an equal. Now, as Clarissa prepared to walk down the aisle, those memories swirled in her mind. She thought of her past, the days when every step felt uncertain, and then the people, like Christopher, who had stepped in, offering guidance, offering love. The music started. Christopher stepped forward, offering his arm. Clarissa looked up at him, her emotions barely contained. His eyes, full of warmth, told her everything she needed to know. "Your father would be so proud of you, Clarissa," Christopher whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I am." Together, they walked down the aisle, their steps steady, their bond unspoken but understood. The small gathering of family and friends watched, but to Clarissa, it felt like the world had fallen away. There was only this moment, her hand on Christopher's arm, the love that had grown between them over the years, and Matthew waiting at the end of the aisle, his eyes filled with admiration and joy. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows, soft laughter, and a few happy tears. Matthew's hands trembled only slightly as he slipped the ring onto Clarissa's finger, his voice steady as he promised to love and cherish her. Clarissa's own voice faltered just for a moment when she repeated her vows, overcome by the emotions swirling in her heart. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the reception carried on with warmth and laughter. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect. Friends toasted to the couple, sharing stories of perseverance, love, and the long road that had brought Clarissa and Matthew together. At the edge of the room, Clarissa found Christopher. She wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For everything." Christopher pulled back, his eyes glistening.
"No, Clarissa."
"Thank you. You gave me a second chance at family." Years passed, but that bond only grew. Christopher was there for every holiday, every milestone, every quiet moment in between. And when Clarissa and Matthew welcomed their first child, a tiny, wide-eyed girl named Catherine, Christopher stood by, holding her gently in his arms, a smile lighting his face. For Clarissa, life had come full circle. The struggles, the triumphs, the lessons, all of it had led her here. And for Christopher, the true wealth wasn't the empire Clarissa inherited, nor the success they both enjoyed. It was the love, the family, the connections that made life rich beyond measure. The lesson from this story is the power of kindness, resilience, and fate. It teaches that even the smallest act of compassion can transform lives in unexpected ways. Clarissa's selflessness in helping a stranger led to her discovering her true identity and inheriting a legacy she never imagined. It reminds us that helping others without expecting anything in return can open doors to new beginnings and lasting bonds. It also highlights the importance of humility and strength, showing that true wealth lies not in material possessions, but in the relationships we build and the love we give. If this story resonated with you and you're looking for more uplifting and inspiring tales, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Together, let's explore stories that highlight the incredible strength of the human spirit and the blessings life brings. Thank you for being here, and I can't wait to share more with you in the next video. Stay positive and keep believing in the beauty of life.